Hi, my name is Gretchen Castle. I'm the Dean at the Earlham School of Religion. I am very excited to be asked to um, say some things, give, to record this video about the issue of climate change, and I'm very grateful to Grace for her invitation to do this. And I'm very excited to be talking to students. I wish it were two-way, but certainly I would welcome any interaction after this video. So I think the reason Grace asked me is I've been involved in climate change action, and in particular faith-based climate change action. So I want to introduce myself to you and then say a few things about two different ways in which I've been involved, and one is through a Quaker organization, and the other is through an interfaith global organization. So I came to climate change, I became interested in it, I have been for a long, long time, but largely through my Quaker awareness and talk among the Quaker community about the earth, the care for creation, our stewardship, our sense of responsibility to use well the gifts that God has given us, and through quite a sadness that we haven't done that very well as a human family. So it's something that I carry quite intentionally, and that I feel strongly about our need as a human family to take care of each other in this way by taking care of the earth and appreciating the gifts that really, I believe, very strongly come from God. They're God-given. So there's a real urgency to climate change work, as you know from your class and from the news. There's such an urgency in lowering the temperature, in reducing our carbon usage, and there are lots and lots of ways to do that in a personal way, each of us taking some responsibility for that. But one of the things that also really concerns me is looking at systems that and ways that we do or don't adopt new technologies to help reduce our our destruction, really, of the earth. One of my favorite sayings is a Quaker saying about walk cheerfully on the earth, answering that of God in every person. And walking cheerfully, we could say, is also walking lightly on the earth and taking good care of what we have. So there's an urgency, and I think COVID in particular has brought a different kind of urgency, a new way of integrating many, many justice issues. And some would argue that climate is an entry into peace work. I think it has a lot to do with economic systems that are inequitable and that really don't work for us. I think I've become quite thoughtful about our system in the United States that, I'll back up a minute. I spent the last 9 years in the United Kingdom working there for Friends World Committee for consultation as General Secretary, and that's the Quaker World Office. So I did a lot of traveling among Quakers, among friends across the world and in many parts of the world. So having lived in another country, as many of you know, really gives you a different perspective on things. And moving back 6 months ago to the United States, I feel quite disturbed, actually, by just the cost of things. I think in a capitalist system, we're often charged for things because they can charge us for these things. So I think it costs a lot to live here, but unnecessarily. I feel quite strongly about that. That's maybe a whole nother lecture, right? Or a whole nother topic. But I think because of COVID, these issues are integrated. And for me, COVID has brought us to a whole new realization that we need to live in a far more socially conscious and socially equitable world. And I think the whole Black Lives Matter awareness has also brought a lot of that on. The whole look at colonization and how detrimental that is to our whole human family. So there are lots of things that kind of come together for me and that include and are integrated with care for the earth. Okay, so let me just talk first about Friends World Committee for Consultation. When I worked there for those 9 years, I got some funding to fund a program, a sustainability program, and we hired a person to work on that. And the goals of that program were largely to bring this to a Quaker audience, to help Quakers engage and to help build the network of those who really are concerned about this issue. And it reached out quite strongly to a lot of young people. So there was, for instance, a World Sustainability Conference that was all held online, but it included people from all corners of the world. And we were able to do that, again, because of COVID, helped us learn how we can use technology to greater effect to create those kinds of networks of people. Another element of the FWCC sustainability project was to help bridge the gap between Quakers who live in places where they were hugely affected by climate change, and help Quakers who are not as affected but certainly are high users, consumers, and can change their lifestyle in order to help heal the earth. So we did a whole series of videos that helped tell the story, helped people tell their story, what it's like in the Philippines to have lots of flooding. What's it like in Kenya to have the seasonal timing change. So there was a story by a young man who they used their garden over many, many years to help their children go to school. That's how they paid for their schooling. And for the youngest child in the family, it's not working. They're not able to plant and harvest the crops in the same way because the climate is changing. So those kinds of stories that help us all understand how it affects other people. A third element of that program was to connect in with the Quaker United Nations office in Geneva, which has a program that they call the Human Impacts of Climate Change. Lindsay Fielder Cook, you may have heard of her or have seen some of her videos. She's amazingly effective in helping at the UN level, helping states look at what is their political will, what could they do along these lines. She's a great resource, and she's a Quaker. She's an amazing person. So Lindsay Fielder Cook, I recommend that you look her up on maybe on the QNO, the Quaker United Nations office website. Very interesting work she's doing. So next I want to describe the project that I was in called Faith and Science, and was working toward COP26. So this was an interfaith group. It engaged, first of all, I was very active in a group called Christian World Communions, which was general secretaries of different world offices from different churches, different communions. And so it included those people, but then it was enlarged greatly to include an interfaith group. So, and then we included scientists in this. Now, this project was sponsored by the British Embassy, the Italian embassy, and the Vatican. And so over the course of a year, we came together every other month. People presented. I presented sort of the Quaker view of all this, and then other faith leaders and then other scientists also contributed to this. And our goal, and let me tell you that, you know, these were interpreted into 7 different languages. So it was intercultural. We worked across languages across the world. So the goal of this group was to see what we could do as faith leaders, to try very hard to create an impact, moving it toward COP26 that was held in Glasgow, Scotland. So we met often, we heard from people, I took copious notes, I have pages and pages of notes. Very, very interesting to hear across the board, across religions, a very, very common intention and a common voice that to me is uncommon perhaps, but that is, it was similar, the interest in caring for our world differently. A lot of people told stories about planting trees in very particular ways, or addressing systemic change, in an economic system that wasn't working. All kinds of different ways that faith leaders carry the concern, help people engage, and try to affect and advocate for both more personal, individual changes, lifestyle changes, and more systemic work at a high level, like at the United Nations or at some of the state government organization. So we met, we wrote an appeal. It was a 4-page appeal that was then presented at COP26. And just prior to that, though, those of us who wanted to were invited to come to the Vatican and present some of our own thoughts. And I was happy to do that. We have since met again online to say to ourselves, let's make those flights worth it. That is, if all we did was go to the Vatican to hear ourselves talk or to create this document for COP26, we still haven't really used those flights well. So let's continue our work. There's talk about continuing, possibly working through the UN Environmental Program, which comes under the UN Environmental Assembly. And we might, I think we're likely to pursue something along those lines. We want to continue to have a voice. And, the faith voice is so important because it's an ethical and a moral voice. And it reaches so many people. A huge percentage of people in the world consider themselves religious people. Or I know in the U.S. there's a lot of talk about the nuns and the spiritual element, that people feel more spiritual maybe than religious. But across the world, it's a very high percentage, maybe 80% or something, of people who actually identify as a religious person. So the impact of religious leaders saying, we Quakers, we Lutherans, we Seventh-day Adventists, we Assemblies of God, all have a stake in this. So it's a very, I think it's a very powerful voice, and a voice that has a lot of power. Having been to the Vatican, I've met the Pope a few times, and I'm just amazed at the impact he has as a religious leader. There's no other religious leader that speaks to the whole world of religious people in a way that he does. Every January, I would receive the Statement on Peace from the Pope. And it was always remarkable to me, and always, it would often bring tears to my eyes to read those words. And yet he would say, we are a communion. We are a communion of people. We are a world family. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to work for the common good of all people. And so that message to me is so strong and so valuable. And I just think he has a lot of impact and continues to want to have a lot of impact to really create a world that works for us. And then I think as Quakers, a lot of my work at Friends World Committee was to amplify the Quaker voice. How do we keep doing that? We need to keep speaking out, speaking up, living our lives in ways that have integrity. And that's sort of the Quaker way, to live into one's life, to make choices that are thoughtful and live our lives in that way. So amplifying the Quaker voice, I think, for me is hugely important. So I think this is at about 20 minutes. Let me just say a couple other things. In terms of personal choice, when I was on my way to Rome, I was sitting next to a woman who was taking a trip to Cyprus. She just wanted to go there, and so she asked me what my trip was about, and I told her I was going to Rome to speak at the Vatican about climate change. And she was like, oh, and she said, I just don't know what it is I could do. I have no idea. And I'm like, okay, well, let me tell you. And the poor woman, I talked her ear off, but to be able to say, even this flight, you can pay a carbon offset to an organization that then will do an activity that helps to replace the carbon in the world. I mean, that's one way, eating less meat, watching your use of plastics, refuse to buy groceries that are wrapped in plastic. I, through having children and all for 30 years, didn't own a dryer. I'd hung my clothes out, or I put them in front of the wood stove, and that included cloth diapers. Some of my friends thought I was crazy, but no, it's those are choices that we can make, that we need to think about our own lives and how we can live in ways that simplify and that maybe allow us to drive less, walk more, maintain forests, and that kind of thing. So in closing, I would like to just read. It's just a 2 minute. 2 minutes was all I was given at the Vatican, but I want to just describe the situation. So we were in this huge place with lots of gold and red and high, hugely painted, artistic mosaics on the ceilings. Big room, and there were, I think, about 60 of us in our group, and we were brought in and we sort of processed in, and then the Pope came in. We signed this appeal that we had written, and then we were each given 2 minutes to speak to the Pope, and he came by and shook our hands, as he often does. And this happened to me several times. He would shake my hand and I'd say I'm from the Quakers, and he always smiled, like a smile of recognition, like thank you for the good work that you all do. And while I was speaking this, I mean, you could find this on YouTube, but he really, I feel like I connected with him. My husband, who stayed up for 2 hours watching the whole thing, said that when many people spoke, he wasn't really, but when I spoke, he was looking up and he was watching me, and I don't know why, but I'm hoping, I felt like we made a connection there. He's an amazing person with amazing presence. But in closing, let me read what I read in that session in the Vatican. Despite a bleak future for this earth, our faith gives us hope. We must come to be reconciled with our earth, our human family, and our God. Quakers, known for our work in peace and justice, are guided by a spiritual imperative to respect all of life. God has entrusted us with the beauty and miracle of creation, and as a human family, we have fallen short of caring for it. We must address our overconsumption and wasteful habits and learn to live in a collective, socially supportive world community, respectful of all life. We must address the unequal economic systems and the human impacts of climate change. The climate crisis affects us all, but not equally. The poorest, who have done the least to cause the crisis, are hardest hit. As wealthier nations, we have a responsibility to remember what Jesus said, "If you have done it to the least of these, you have done it unto me." Pope Francis's expression of interconnectedness and care for the common good have brought faith groups together. His leadership matters, and our actions today and going forward matter. Now is the moment. Let us remember what Jesus said, "Go and sin no more." Thank you.